Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z. Martin, and tonight we are talking about the journeys through the underworld. Nobody dies and comes back more than the Winchesters, and they've been a lot of places. So let's talk about where their journeys have taken them and how all of that worked, theirs and some of their friends. But before we do that, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Rick.
Well, my name is Rick Gualtieri, and I'm an urban fantasy, horror, and comedy writer. I have over 30 books out there. Been doing this for about a dozen years, and I didn't make it all the way through Supernatural. There are some of the final seasons I have to go through and watch, but I made it through a lot. So
that counts. Elektra, how about you?
I'm Elektra Hammond. I'm a writer and an editor, and I've been with Supernatural from the first episode all the way till that very last one aired.
Okay, Carole.
Carole Stokes. I've been a Supernatural fan since season 3. I started writing fanfic in 2012, and I haven't stopped writing or watching or just having fun talking about Supernatural.
Okay, and I'm Gail Z. Martin and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic and urban fantasy. As Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance, but all my modern worlds are ones Sam and Dean could walk into and feel right at home. I fell in love with the series halfway through season 11, binge watched 11 seasons in 4 months so I could be ready at the start of season 12, fell down the rabbit hole and have kept going, and I hope I never hit bottom. So the fancy word for journeys through the underworld is catabasis, because every culture has stories about people who go to the underworld for some reason or another and try at least to come back. Some of them make it, some of them don't. They have all kinds of reasons for going and things they're trying to accomplish. But with the Winchesters, most of the time it's my brother died, I want him back. They're pretty predictable, but sometimes there were some side quests, so to speak, involved. What's your favorite trip of theirs through the underworld? Elektra?
We're talking just the underworld?
We can define underworld as broadly as you want. So it can include, technically it's the realms of death, heaven, hell, purgatory, everything in between. But it's supernatural, so there's alternate universes and everything. Whatever you want to make it mean, it can mean.
Well, my favorite is when Roy and Walt take out Sam and Dean, and they end up in that weird version of heaven where they meet Ash, who's got the whole place absolutely wired, and he shows them around. Cass can only communicate with them via the radio, but Ash, he can find the right people and get them where they need to go. That's a bizarre version of heaven where you're locked into your little heaven of your memories, before it gets fixed.
Yeah, where you're on kind of an infinite loop of greatest hits.
Because when you die, you might go to hell and you might go to heaven if you're a Winchester, but you'll find a way back somehow.
Carole, how about you?
I really kind of enjoyed Purgatory. I thought Purgatory was a really interesting little twist to throw in there. And I really liked how they presented it. It was very desaturated, very shadowy, very they did a good job with that whole really kind of creepy, otherworldly atmosphere. Of course, riddled with monsters and demons, as you might expect. And it just was really nice and creepy. Kind of about that time, hell was starting to look a little sanitized, and so Purgatory was kind of refreshingly ominous and dangerous. And I really liked that it was so differently presented. You knew right away that you were not in Kansas anymore. So I particularly liked that and the danger it presented, and certainly the way it affected Dean, you know, because he was there for so long, and by the time he comes back, he's, you know, he's pretty feral.
Mhm.
So I really enjoyed Purgatory.
I also appreciated the genius of them saving a whole lot of money on night shoots by using a filter and just shooting in the, you know, apparently Purgatory looks a lot like the Vancouver woods, only black and white. So props for low budget, great effect. I think my favorite Underworld, for as much as we see Heaven, Hell, and Purgatory, is actually Sam's mind in The Man Who Knew Too Much. When we have Godsteel on the loose and Sam's in the panic room and he's still struggling to literally pull the pieces of his mind together after Cass shattered the wall that Death put up. And Sam is not reliving his greatest hits. He's wandering through this really spooky terrain of, and we realize as it goes on that it's his own shattered mind, and he is reintegrating the pieces of himself. And it's a very harrowing journey. I think it is very worthy of being a journey through the Underworld because he's going through his own personal mental hell and finding a way back out of it whole. So I'm gonna stick with that one. How about you, Rick?
Something like Carole said kind of stuck with me, how like later on hell kind of felt almost too sanitized. And I think that's like, you know, that's a symptom of any long running show where they establish mythology, but then they kind of get into the whole concept of like, you know, as writers, we want to show, not tell. But in a show like in a TV show, when they show and they don't necessarily have the budget for it, it can sometimes be a little underwhelming. Or when they show too much, it becomes like, you know, it becomes less threatening, kind of like, you know, when you see too much of the Borg in Star Trek. So my favorite was, and I believe it was the first time Dean died during one of the season finales. You just got a glimpse of hell. And it was like, you know, a glimpse, and then like, you know, when the season started up again, he's brought back. You don't really see any of that. You just kind of hear him talking about it, and I think that's so much more frightening than anything they're really going to show on, let's be honest, a CW show. Is like kind of like just getting like glimpses and just kind of like, I guess, hearing the fear in his voice as he was like, you know, kind of remembering the things that happened to him.
Mm-hmm. So we did get to spend a lot of time in Heaven, Hell, and Purgatory. Were there any other aspects or other places that struck you as being the Underworld? Because we certainly have a lot of metaphorical Underworld series as well as literally the Underworld or the past.
The empty.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big fun place full of, well, and it was another clever thing they did with how they shot it, because it's nothing. It's a big bit of nothing. And then, you know, it's often a single person lit in blackness, or a person on a chair. And they make it look very, very vast and scary with like virtually no props.
And a big, creepy, glistening black outline of a person who draws a smile on himself that is not reassuring.
The black goo that shows up in other places to represent the empty is also pretty terrifying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it was a great concept to come up with, you know, after Heaven, Hell, and Purgatory. Well, you know, where do the angels and demons go? They go to the empty.
Yeah, it was a great idea. Carole?
I definitely concur with the whole less is more thing, like what as Rick was referring to when we first see Dean in hell the first time, and he's just on those cables. and there's nothing. It's just like cables and hooks and that's it. But that was horrifying. You know, that was really horrifying, as opposed to the beautiful but not scary, you know, Gothic tunnels and rooms and stuff that we see in the Crowley era, you know, which was very, very scenic and atmospheric, but did not necessarily connote hell to me. You know, I also really like, and I liked yours, Gail, too, because I love that whole episode where it's like Sam's mind and, you know, oh, it's just so beautifully done. And he does such a great job being all those Sams and everything. And that's really scary. I found the cage. I liked it when they were in the cage, where it's actually like the simulated cage where they're talking to Lucifer, and it's what Rowena had cooked up. And it was a less is more kind of thing, because you really just had the cage and a lot of darkness, and the blue lighting was good. You know, there was a lot of like great lighting, and just the iron bars of the cage and the sense of them being really penned in. I really liked that a lot. Now that was atmospheric and creepy.
Mhm.
So I would have liked to, you know, see more of that. And that's the kind of thing that I missed with hell. You know, I missed the pain of hell. But seriously, you know, hell started off so, you know, really scary, and you were left to fill in the blanks more, and so it became scarier, rather than we're walking through these, much like my back job, where so you're walking through these stone, you know, tunnels and rooms, and it's great, and I liked it, but it wasn't scary.
I love the upgrade that Hell got under Rowena. Not only did you have welcome receptions, which I thought was a nice touch, but that's when we got the Gothic arches and the big robed statues on either side. And it really, you know, upped the atmosphere very much, as Rowena would have. And so I thought it was interesting to see how Hell changed depending on who was in charge. So, you know, with Lucifer, it's the cage, although he was trapped there. You get the you saw Dean and being tortured. With Crowley, it's bureaucracy. And then with Rowena, she's queen, and it's going to be regal. So I thought that was a fun touch with the show. Rick?
Yeah.
I mean, I think again, it comes down to some of the stuff they just implanted into, like, you know, the user's imagination was always so much better than, like, you know, what they could possibly, like, you know, show. And I know one of the favorites, and it wasn't even really a place, it was just an idea, was, and I don't know episode names, so forgive me on that, but the episode where, like, you know, where they meet all the other gods, like, you know, Kali, Odin, and, like, you know, Lucifer takes them down, and just the implication of, like, of our universe, and they were the first gods, and God actually showed up and kind of took over and stuff. And that was always something I was like, if they were to ever do, like, say, I don't know, like a cartoon prequel, that's what I want to see. I want to see, like, you know, this crazed mythology work out where they somehow managed to have, you know, to have the Judeo-Christian with other religions, and all of it is, like, you know, valid and such. And I just love what that implied. It implied such a vast universe that we're only seeing this little part of that, like, you know, a little part of that, of course, like Sam and Dean are continually messing up, but or saving, depending on your point of view. But yeah, that was like one of those episodes that stuck with me, that I was just like, I want to know more about that.
Yeah, that was a fun episode. Well, and we not only had in Supernatural the literal underworld, but we also had a lot of metaphorical underworlds of moving through liminal space, moving from realm to realm, moving through places that might not really exist. And one of the places that makes me think of that is in the AU world, when the vampires kill Sam, and he's dragged off into that tunnel, and he wakes up again, thanks to Lucifer, and he's stuck in this tunnel, caught between the devil and the vampires. that's very much of an underworld feel. He's been taken away from the people who care about him. He's being faced with an untenable choice. And there's a whole lot of blood and darkness. So any of those kinds of things, or just other aspects of the afterworld that we haven't touched yet? Carole?
That was a spoiler alert, Rick.
Yeah. He comes back. He's a Winchester.
Oh, I love that scene. I mean, I hate seeing, what happens to him, but yes, he's in that cave. It was very, to me, it was very Moria, like out of, Tolkien, where you're in the mines and, the danger is coming and you're just waiting for it to arrive. It had that kind of darkness and suspense. So that was a really good one. And again, less was more. Lots of darkness, cavern, isolation. That's just plain scary. I really liked, in terms of kind of like more in the AU sense, the end, when Zechariah takes Dean and puts him in the future after the whole Croatoan plague and everything, which of course, well, so timely. And I remember reading about it in terms that it was actually a movie set that they got to use. And so it was really, a rich set, really, really in depth and everything, where he could like run around and all these things were there, and they're chasing him through the alleys and the streets, and it was just really, really well done. It's a really good, creepy, even when no one's there, because it's so empty, something's wrong. And of course you've got the newspapers blowing in the street, which is always like, somehow that's always the indicator that there's been something apocalyptic. Newspapers are blowing in the streets. But it was so empty, and then you have the feral child, and he's running with the whole pack of the Croatoan zombie people after him and stuff. And that was really a good, creepy, we had everything going on there to really give us a good scare.
Okay. Elektra.
I've never quite figured out where it is in between all of the things, but I've always loved Death's Library, and I really want to go there. Also, they always, because they have that special key, they always enter in where the W's are, which I always thought was clever, and it gives us some idea of just how expansive that library must be.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Rick? Oh, go ahead, Elektra. I'm sorry.
No, it's such a beautiful place, and Billy is so awesome there that you get some idea of just what Death is busy doing when Death isn't, around reaping people or running the reapers. That there's this whole space that Death runs.
Or eating pizza. Yeah, pizza. How about you, Rick?
I mean, Elektra brings up a good point with Death. The first couple of times we meet him, it's we really just get like scenes with him and Dean alone, and it's almost like, and probably because everybody around Death dies otherwise, it's almost like they're kind of in their own little world for like a little bit there, where they can talk, and almost like everything stops like around them, and like, I forget the actor's name, but the guy that played Death was just so freaking creepy. He really came off this sense of this being that's just beyond like the concept of imagination. One of the things I never liked about Supernatural, and again, it comes down to the budget, and I'm going to keep harping on that, is sometimes they took like creatures that like should have been like insanely like like just beyond powerful, and they had to kind of like well, dumb them down a little bit for TV. But Death just like was one of those times where like you just got this sense of this is something that is beyond these guys, and there is like nothing they can do to like to really just comprehend this this being. So just kind of like that, I'd say.
Yeah, he has a tremendous gravitas in those parts, and it's very jarring when you see him at a supernatural convention and he comes out skipping. and ends up being very lighthearted and totally funny.
Singing about bluebells and things.
Yeah, yeah. The actor himself is marvelous, but yes, he does bring that kind of gravitas because he has sort of a unique look, and you spot him in a lot of things. But he's yeah, he was a magnificent death.
The moment when that man runs into him and he just turns and, you know, brushes off his shoulder like that, that's just, it's exquisite. It's an exquisite.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just saying kudos to Julian Riching for conveying so much with so little. You know,
Something else about liminal spaces. When Dean has to reap souls for a day, he is in a liminal space, sort of, where people can't see him unless they're dying.
Which is pretty much true of all the interactions that he has or that they have with the Reapers, whether it's Dean in the hospital with Tessa or at the after the werewolf with Billy. Yeah, he is in the in-between space between living and dying.
But he gets to spend like a whole 24 hours there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another very interesting episode they put together.
Yeah.
I like the scene in an episode in season 5 when they all go to Carthage, and when they get there, there are Reapers everywhere, just all of these black-clad, motionless figures filling the streets. And even though that's not an otherworldly place, because it was just in this town, it's a really creepy scene, and just seeing all those Reapers there just really imbued it with, once again, that otherworldly feel, where we were now outside the normal reality in this like that bubble kind of place, that here were all these Reapers just waiting, and that was a good creepy moment.
One of the, to me, metaphorical afterlives was in one of the later seasons when Sam and Cass are chasing down some leads, and they happen upon this town where everything seems to be 1950s perfect, including the milk, the milkshakes and the dairy aisle. And of course, it is too good to be true, and it makes people forget who they are, and it locks them into this Stepford Wives, Twilight Zone kind of perfection as seen by the guy who engineered all this. But in a way, it also, to me, kind of mocks that whole original idea of heaven being your, best of clips, because here was this perfect town where everybody gets milkshakes, everybody goes to the diner and the sock hops, and everything is perfect, and everybody is always happy all the time. And if you're not happy, your head explodes like a ripe melon. So I thought that was very appropriately jarring, and kind of almost a critique on that heaven is where you really don't continue living. You just don't know you haven't continued living. You're just lost in nostalgia, because that's sort of what the guy was perpetuating there, was a time and place that never actually happened quite like that, except in his own mind. Rick, how about you?
God, I mean, I think a perfect parallel to that is after Sam gets trapped with Lucifer and Michael, and Dean has a small slice of life, and he gets with his girlfriend, the kid who they thought was his son or so, and he actually starts having a life. And the tragedy there is it was at the beginning of the season, and you knew it wasn't going to last, and you started off with this Dean who's happy for a change, and it's the tragedy there was just watching it completely it was kind of one of those, Sam comes back and he's grateful to see Sam, but at the same time, well, he knows that little bit of life he just got isn't going to last. It's over. There's no way he can keep it. So, I mean, in some ways, it's kind of he gets a little slice of the path never taken, that he can never have. And that's like, that's so I think there's some parallels to be had there with like, kind of almost like a heaven type scenario. We
Okay.
got a little bit of heaven on earth.
Mm-hmm. Elektra?
Well, later versions of heaven seem to be portrayed as just like a white room, and then there was a white hallway, and they seem to just not have maybe the financing to make heaven look grand, so they just went for Spartan. This is the throne room with the big chair and nothing else. And
at least they didn't have curtains. I heard one of the actors who was on Babylon 5 say, we always knew when we were short on production budget because the set would be nothing but curtains. And now when I watch the reruns, it's like, okay, they ran out of money there. Look, it's all curtains.
Window treatment. Yeah, it was just so sparse. And you started to wonder, why the angels bothered to stay around. I mean, there'd been earlier scenes where it was clear there was a garden somewhere. And in the later scenes, they just put them in white rooms. Maybe they shot them all during the winter.
Well, it did make you wonder if that's all heaven is, then isn't that going to make for a very, very boring afterlife? Is just, recycling the reruns. There's no actually after life. It's sort of more after continued existence, but there's not actually any living going on.
Well, at least the heaven that we saw in season 5 with the Dark Side of the Moon, even though we were replaying memories and stuff, at least they were kind of more fully fleshed. And when they go into where Ash and Pamela are, and Pamela's talking about she's going to all these concerts and she's doing all this stuff, and that's how her heaven is. So at least she was having a good time. Like Bobby was just in that, like one of those rooms, it was kind of like, although he got to read Tori Spelling's, book again. But I kind of like the heaven. It wasn't really heaven, but when Dean is locked away from Michael and he has his bar, Rocky's bar, and Pamela's there and everything, I really liked that as a little kind of isolated heaven-ish, heaven adjacent space where he was kind of living out one of his best little fantasies, having his bar and drinks and, and just kicking back and having a good time. And that was a nice little one.
Locked inside his own head.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But he had a really nice bar in there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't just like in this white room, which, yeah.
I mean, which of us wouldn't want to be locked inside our own head for a while?
Well, and Rick mentioned, the time when Sam was gone, where Dean got to be with Lisa, but we also had the Jinn dream when he was in a fantasy inside of his head caused by the Jinn. And so if heaven is our favorite desires, our wishes, our deepest wants, he kind of got that. Now it was killing him because the Jinn was draining his blood. But until he died, it was a very happy fantasy and kind of a slice of heaven in that he was getting something that at least at that time in his life he thought he wanted. What else? We've seen a lot of different places and variations. What other? Go ahead, Carole.
I like the beautiful room. All those moments when they spirit Dean away and he has those little tete-a-tetes with Zachariah, and they just always called the beautiful room. it's the beautiful room, and with its little objet d'art and the decor and everything, and they could whip up his favorite burgers and a big old tub full of beer and everything. I love the very cat-like moment where he goes over and he just kind of flicks one of these figurines off so it crashes on the floor. But it was like clearly like any other kind of environment they were ever in. It was so elegant and everything. And like that to me almost seemed more heaven-like than the sterile white spaces that we saw later.
Okay.
Kind of a little bit of a trend that unfortunately I think we see as the show goes on, where we kind of have a little bit more fully fleshed environments and more evocative environments than we get later. But yes, I really liked the beautiful room, and that was a very heaven, like a little heaven pocket.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Elektra?
There was also the Old West, the alternate Old West, where Sam and Dean go back and meet Colt and go and have adventures. With some of them with Samuel Colt, and some of them discovering that the Old West maybe isn't as clean and fun as you thought it might be. I mean, they were on a mission, but Dean did do a little bit of sightseeing here and there.
Yeah. It certainly would have been a place that he would have loved to explore if he'd have gotten to pick his own places to go in heaven. Rick?
I think kind of reaching a bit of the limit of my memory here. So not really coming up with anything to, like, to add there. As I said, for me, it was a lot of the character moments related to things that I think really made it so much more than the depictions. I mean, a character defining moment that I loved was Dean's disappointment in that, when he was in hell, he was tortured for 30 years before he finally broke. And then later on, he learned that his father lasted well over a century and never broke once. And it just kind of like, that was like one of those things where it's like his own personal hell was like learning that, like, yes, he can't live up to John.
Mm-hmm. Well, Elektra had mentioned the garden. We saw the garden twice, or two different gardens. They're never exactly completely clear on that. There was Joshua, the garden keeper, the one who kind of walked with God in the biblical sense of being as close to a friend to the Almighty as someone who isn't could be, the confidant. And he was in that beautiful place that was just such a peaceful environment. And then we also see Jack when he swallows the thing that looks like the Quidditch ball, and the golden snitch thing, and ends up in the Garden of Eden with the snake and the little girl and all of that. Again, that very peaceful garden-like sense that's a very traditional view of heaven. There was at least one of those places that was actually the Cleveland Botanical Garden. I don't remember which.
The Joshua one was
the Joshua one, yeah. So apparently if you ever go meet the gardener of heaven, it looks like the Cleveland Botanical Garden, in case you wondered.
And late as things go, Dean found that pearl that allowed him to make what he thought was make a wish for the thing that he wanted the most. And then he discovered that it would figure out what he wanted the most and grant it to him. And what he wanted the most was family in Lebanon.
Yeah.
And they got like a whole day of just the family back together. And that was a nice little piece of alternate something.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the other places that struck me very much as an afterlife sort of place was the AU, the alternate universe where Mary had never made the deal, Sam and Dean were never born, the angels won the war by destroying everything. And we ended up spending a lot of time there over the course of a couple of seasons.
Apocalypse world.
Apocalypse World, yeah. So it struck me as being very much of a hellscape, especially when you realized, what had to have happened to cause that. And there were all those pointy things sticking out of the ground, and I wasn't sure whether the ash there were a whole lot of churches close together and the ash had swamped everything except the steeple, or what those actually were. But it was a very effective motif to give you this sense of desolation.
Didn't some of them have people stuck on them?
Yes, impaled.
Yeah. That was pretty creepy.
I
And then you have the angelic smoke bombs or whatever that would come zooming in and explode and everything. Yeah, it was a pretty lethal environment.
Mm-hmm.
There's a picture similar to that environment of Vlad the Impaler's work. And I think somebody was just inspired by creating a landscape like that. And they didn't stop and think, what are these things? And in Vlad's case, he actually put up spikes and dropped people on them.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they just thought it would look cool if we made a bunch of triangular pointy things and dropped people on them.
And it did look pretty cool.
Yeah, it looks creepy as hell.
Yeah, it comes back to what I'm saying is that sometimes you don't have to explain things. Sometimes when you explain things, it makes it less cool than the fact that, okay, this is just here and it's creepy and there's dead people attached to it, and maybe it's best we don't know.
We're better off not knowing. Ignorance can be bliss.
Well, go ahead.
When there's a really big footprint, sometimes it's scarier to not know what made it.
Right, the bad place.
Oh,
which had its very hellish aspects to it.
But plenty of yummy lizards.
That footprint was so big that they could hop into it and walk around.
And I don't know that they realized, at least in the clip we saw of them, that it was a footprint. It was so big. It's
No,
like
we did
things from above to know what you're in.
But we certainly did. And they never did show us what it was that made that footprint. But we know that it was very, very large.
Yeah.
And I think we're better off, like Rick says, sometimes we're better off not knowing. It was more fun to just, I'm sure we can speculate, at least it was some kind of giant dinosaur-y thing, but we didn't need to see it. To see the footprint was scary enough.
Yeah, I mean, from a budget perspective, honestly, if they had decided to show it, we would have just gotten it in person form and would have said, like, it's like, yeah, I'm actually Tiamat, or so I just don't want to show my true form, which I understand. I 100% understand, but yeah, it's one of those things where it's just like, something, just leave that as something that people will argue about for years to come.
Mm-hmm.
Not every question needs to be answered.
True. Well, and we did get some literal underworld spaces. We got the sewers in Skin, which were creepy as hell. We got the bunker, which, for being underground, was a sanctuary. For a while, it was pretty much Winchester heaven in terms of having a safe space to go and to bring the people they rescued back to. And it had a library, and it had a dungeon, and it had all this cool stuff, and a kitchen.
They still don't know how many rooms it has.
Yeah.
It's infinite, it seems.
Yeah, we had Cuthbert Sinclair's underground hidden lair, which I always wanted to see more of. And
the library, the Campbell family library. Hidden under Samuel's office.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we also had the one where the guy hired them to steal something, and they ended up duct taping him to a roller chair and sending him down the hallway to get hit by all the little arrows, Indiana Jones style. I always wanted to see more of what was in there after they finally got the door open. But those were literal underworld spaces that carried their own peril, or with the bunker, it was a safe place. And I think that's kind of an interesting metaphor as well.
Well, and they never did go through the door into Oz. They just opened it.
This
Mhm.
trope.
I always wanted to see more of that. I wanted to see
Didn't we
Charlie
all?
go off and have adventures, which would have been fun. Yeah. Well, and as Carole, I'm sure, has seen, fan fiction writers have run amok with what other rooms might have been in the bunker and where they might have gone, and
The things they might have discovered, and artifacts and spells, and oh look, there's a hot tub, you know.
and a whole room full of things you should not touch that Dean only discovers you shouldn't touch until after he's touched them and something has happened.
Invisible or whatever.
Cat ears or something. Have we left anything out? We've been pretty
Yes.
thorough. Yeah. Go for it, Carole.
About the heaven we see in the finale,
This is true.
where the heavens have now all been, as Elektra said, they've been fixed. And so now heaven is open, all of heaven is open to everybody. And it's beautiful. It surprisingly, it looks a lot like Vancouver Forest, but they're beautiful, so it's okay. And Dean goes on his drive through the years while he was waiting for Sam. And, you know, and Bobby's like, oh yeah, Rufus is over there, and the parent, you know, John and Mary are over there. And it's just peaceful and serene, but it's much more real looking and rich again, as opposed to the whiteness and the white hallways and the individual compartments. It's now open and everybody's there. And then, you know, they have that final shot on the bridge, and you could not ask for more gorgeous scenery than when they're on that bridge, and the pine-clad mountains and the river and everything is just stunningly beautiful. And then they pan back and you just see them. It's beautiful. And so that's our final shot of heaven, and it is absolutely gorgeous, and you know what anybody could wish for, because you'll be with everybody you love, and you know.
Well, and nobody is chasing anybody away.
Right.
Mhm.
There's nobody chasing you and telling you you have to get back to your corner of
Yes.
heaven.
The Bobbies are surely.
The Bobbies are always surly. It
Well,
just,
and oh, go ahead. We know that Dean's idea of hell, of heaven, is being in the Impala, driving down Crazy Street with Sam riding shotgun. He's said that's his ultimate. Now, there is an interesting headcanon, and we will see whether or not it bears out or not, that the Winchesters, the whole case that Dean is working of finding out the true history of his parents, is actually keeping himself busy while he's waiting in heaven for Sam to show up. I'm going to be real intrigued to see whether or not that plays out. There are a whole lot of arguments for and against, but I'm intrigued by that idea. You know, we've got 30 some years to kill. Might as well work a case while you're there. So that'll be interesting to see if that is yet another version of heaven. Well, folks, believe it or not, we have blown through our time like we always do. So before we wrap up, let's let everybody get a chance to say where people can find you online, starting with Rick.
Well, I mean, I am Rick Gualtieri pretty much on every social media, including my website, rickgualtieri.com. Nobody can spell it, so honestly, just go to Google and type in Bill the Vampire, and that will bring you to some of my stuff in some way, shape, or form.
Okay, Elektra.
Elektra Hammond. You could find everything you need to know at untilmidnight.com.
Very good. Carole.
You can find me on Facebook under Carole M. Stokes. I'm often in the TFWNC group that Gail runs. I'm in Continual a lot. On Twitter, I'm at true_firesign10. And all of my fiction is on AO3 under firesign10. Mind the tags.
And I'm pretty easy to find at gailzmartin.com, morganbryce.com, all the social media is a variation of those. I do run the Supernatural TFNC group in here on Facebook, and I am a staff columnist for the Winchester Family Business blog, but most of the time you can find me here on Continual. So thank you so much for being wonderful panelists tonight. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There will be more Supernatural coming up soon on Continual, so we'll see you online.